Thanks for coming out tonight. It's a really awesome opportunity to be able to delve into Mark de Suvero's work, The Night Truck, or actually just Night Truck from 1975. I think if you would have told me that I was going to spend a couple of weekends researching and devoting hours of time to a modernist white male sculpture, I might have called you crazy. This sort of falls outside of the realm of what I mostly find, or that my area of research and interest really in the arts. But the sort of interactive quality of this piece, which you can come up and touch and have this amazing rocking motion, makes it a really unique piece for its era, and I think also in just this tradition of sculpture in general. It's by far, and really the reason I chose it is by far one of my most favorite museum experiences ever, is being here on the free day in particular, when there's just tons and tons of people walking around in the galleries, and this piece is sitting totally static, and you come up and make it active, and the children just go crazy, and the adults also have that kind of childish glee in their eye, just knowing that they can come up and have this very intimate moment with it. So.
There's nothing that says you can touch it.
Right, yeah. Yeah, and I'm not sure if that's, I mean, part of my research was talking to the chief preparator, Matthew Juniper, about the work, and he was sort of, oh, it's got that little bit of a squeak when you get it just right too, which is nice. And he was actually saying that that's the biggest challenge of the work is getting it perfectly level, because if it's just a little off kilter, it squeaks horribly, and it's like sort of piercing. And then also, he was also mentioning to me that there's definitely, and you can see the metal shavings that are happening around the base where it's connecting, and it's sort of wearing itself out.
Maybe it needs to be greased.
Well, I'm not sure the museum staff would approve of that sort of interaction. But I mean, I think like that, those sorts of things also make the work for me like really interesting. And it really, like the only other piece that has this sort of quality that I'm aware of in the museum's collection is Ice Bag, Scale B by Klaus Oldenburg, which is actually created around the same time, 1971, which is this sort of plastic and cloth ice bag that you can hit this button and it inflates. It used to be installed upstairs, but it's just heard actually, it's from so much usage of twisting, it's starting to wear, and so I think that's sort of taken out of rotation, if you will. And I feel it's funny, I'm not sure why I didn't know more about Mark's work prior to doing all this research. There's definitely areas that do overlap of our interests. Some of it, I think, is the way that he's been historicized. You know, he's sort of in this era of the 70s and 80s of, you know, kind of creating these modernist, abstract expressionist. I mean, there's sort of all these terms, constructivist works that get tossed out around him. You know, he's not in the sort of minimalist camp, and he's not really included in like Gardner's Encyclopedic History of Art. In the 2 editions I checked, he's not included in those histories. And so even though he has works in I think like 27 states, in like 7 or 8 countries, these public art pieces, he's just not kind of a normal household name. And he is still alive, actually. And so I couldn't quite remember when I first discovered his work. I was trying to think. I couldn't remember if it was actually this piece or the 2006 project he did with Ritkrit Teravanija, who's a Thai artist who really specializes in social practice work. And in 2006, he and de Suvero recreated the Peace Tower from 1966, which I will actually talk a little bit about later. And originally, Ritkrit really wanted to recreate the Peace Towers and put it in Central Park during the Republican National Convention of 2004, but the city wouldn't allow him to do that. And so then he was going to sort of do that outside of de Suvero, and then after that kind of denial, he approached de Suvero and was like, oh, I'd really love to work with you. And so they recreated that for the biennial. And in that kind of setting, in that era, I saw that work. I mean, it's a little inert in the sort of confines of the Whitney and that that really brutalist architecture that the Whitney has, and really doesn't do justice to the work, but it was pretty great to have that occur. So this is one of two works that the museum owns of de Suvero's. The other is a brightly colored lithograph, which is not very common of his work in terms of printmaking. He doesn't do a lot of printmaking. So that was sort of interesting. I hadn't seen it. Oh, yes, I did. I saw an image of it, I guess. And this bright color is something that actually repeats fairly often in his work, not exampled here. But his public art sculptures are almost all bright red. These structures made of I-beams that are just bright red. And this work was purchased through the Evan H. Roberts Memorial Sculpture Collection Fund. And it was purchased in 1979, so it was purchased just 4 years after its making. And I wasn't really sure where this piece was made. De Suvero was arrested twice in the 70s for his protest against the Vietnam War. He was very active. And in the second arrest, there's some rumors or stories about maybe he assaulted a police officer during the arrest, and so he sort of had this self-imposed exile. And he went and lived in France, finally sort of settling in the Chalon-sur-Saône in France, where he worked in this shipyard and sort of cut a deal with a steel manufacturer there to get all the scraps, and he lived in this abandoned oil tanker. And yeah, he was there until 1975. And so I really was a little like, oh, wonder where this was made, like in that zone. And some of the, just looking at it and knowing the history a little bit, you can kind of start pulling things apart. There's stamped on the back of this Bethlehem, which is an indication that the steel came from Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. So that was sort of one clue. And then I just sort of finally bit the bullet and emailed the studio and his gallery. And they did confirm that it was actually created in '75 at the Petaluma, California facility that he had started, this sort of huge open air studio that he began out there. So that was, that kind of research was a lot of fun to do, actually. I also reached out to Noel, who's one of the works in the registrar's office here, to sort of look over the paperwork on the piece to sort of find out some of its history. And I discovered that the curator of the Portland Art Museum I had never heard of, William Chiego, purchased the work in 1979 and was first sort of like pitching the idea in August, and the work was shipped in October. And the work was purchased from Richard Bellamy, who was often termed the eyes of the 60s. He not only launched de Suvero's career, but George Segal, Klaus Oldenburg, Donald Judd, Lucas Samaras, and many, many others. His Green Gallery was a hotbed of activity for the artwork coming out of the mid to early 60s. And really and he did this pretty amazing project from '75 until his death in '98. He set himself this amazing task of documenting all of de Suvero's outdoor sculptures, which were then, you can go ahead, which were then included in an exhibition at Storm King Art Center, which is a space that's done, I think, 5 de Suvero exhibitions over the years. This amazing sort of outdoor sculpture. It's pretty. The curator, Chicago, wrote this amazing sort of memorandum announcing the acquisition of the art truck, and I would like to read it because it sort of places the work in this interesting historical context of what the museum was doing at that time. Mark de Servo's Night Truck, a steel sculpture of 1975, is the latest and most contemporary purchase for the museum's Evan H. Roberts Memorial Sculpture Collection. It is a large, bold, severe work composed of a standing Z-shaped form upon which is balanced a V-shaped, prow-like, open-work structure which rocks gently or wildly when pushed by the viewer. One of de Servo's recent works, it is crafted from scratch, no longer employs the found materials of his earlier works from the 1960s. Night Truck is is directly within the tradition of open, linear, cubist-based, constructivist-influenced metal sculptures of Picasso, Gonzalez, the Constructionists, David Smith, and Anthony Caro. And there's a great Caro piece actually just on the other side here.
You forgot to say it was romantic, too.
A tradition to which De Suvero has added mightily as well. Night Trek adds a major link in Portland's representation of this tradition, joining the Picasso Cubist head of 1909 in recently acquired work by the famous Russian constructivist sculptor Namo Gabo, entitled Linear Constructions Variation No. 1. And I think that piece is actually up over there, or at least it was. Maybe it could be gone. So it's really like thinking about the museum making this purchase just 4 years after its making, and it's sort of this, it's definitely a very forward-thinking collection management program happening at that time. That curator actually is now the director of the McNay Art Museum in San Antonio, where he's been since 1991. Born Marco Polo De Suvero in Shanghai, 1933, he is the son of a submarine commander of Italian descent. His father and mother lived in China for about 10 years doing diplomatic work. And in 1941, his father was Jewish, and with the sort of joining of Italy with the Nazis, they sort of saw the writing on the wall and immigrated to California. So Marco grew up mostly in Oakland and did most of his undergrad work at the University of Santa Barbara. And he's got this great quote. Robert Thompson, the sculpture teacher there, let me take his sculpture course as I had been painting stick figures of war victims. And this teacher just sort of let him take that and sort of encouraged him to try to translate some of those drawings into sculptural forms, which, thinking about stick figures in some of his big outdoor sculptures, you can really start painting that picture in your head of almost like paint sticks, red paint sticks, creating these early drawings. He ended up finishing his degree in philosophy at the University of California, Berkeley, but really at that time he was mostly making sculptures under the guidance of Stephen Novak. In 1957, De Suvero moved to New York for a girl, and where he just continued to make work. He lived in a fish market in the meatpacking district and did construction. And in 1960, while working in construction, he was critically injured in an elevator accident. The boss had asked him to sort of load this lumber that was too big for the elevator on top of the elevator and to ride on top of the elevator with it. And in a video, he says, at that time I was too stupid to protect myself rather than the property, and he protected the property instead and crushed himself, crushed his spine.
Did they not have OSHA?
No OSHA in the 60s. They, at the time, said he had about a 20% chance of ever walking again. He spent 2 years in a wheelchair, and in 1963, though, he did walk again. But there's this great film called North Star, which is, it's available at the PNCA library. I'm not sure if it's available elsewhere. But in one of the scenes, you can see him swimming, and you can see his legs. They're very, very skinny, and like he's still from the knee down, totally has no feeling, but is able to walk incredibly. So this really changed the nature of his work. Prior to this, he was making these pieces out of lumber, and I'll sort of talk about them in a minute, but this had a huge impact on him. But what's also pretty amazing is he had his first one-man exhibition just a few months after the accident happened, in October 1960 at this Green Gallery. And the works at that time were assembled of weathered timbers joined by long ropes and chains, which would actually sort of continue to become just I-beams and cables. But this way of working with the wood and these sort of large things, he just couldn't do anymore from the wheelchair. So he took up welding. He put the sort of welder's blanket and materials that you would wear in his lap. and just started welding these wooden and steel sculptures in his lap. And he did that for many years, and his second show actually included a lot of those in 1963. But these wooden sculptures that he made in the 1960s exhibition at the Green Gallery were pretty amazing to people. Like they were in a different language. They weren't sort of in this pre-Judd, or just sort of like Judd and Morris, Robert Morris, sort of starting minimalism at that time. But it also wasn't quite like Anthony Caro. He wasn't using steel. He was using these found objects, much like some of his contemporaries at that time, Jean Follett, John Chamberlain, and Rauschenberg, of course. But they were these huge chunks of wood, and they really seemed to people like brushworks of abstract expressionism, and this sort of abstract expressionist quality would really stick with his work over the years. And his use of the junk material, though, really differs from Rauschenberg and some of these others, because he really uses it to expand into space. And they also become architectural forms to hold other objects like I-beams and pipes. He was sort of asked about some of the geometry of his work over the years, and he has this great quote in 2005, quote, "There are equivalent structures in the three dimensions, so that the pteranodon, like a triangle," which is this sort of geometric term that's used in architecture a lot, like a triangle is a very solid, non-deformable geometric object. I've been so interested, like a lot of the other Park Place artists, in that special kind of geometry, topology, which has to do with the deformations, and it's a different kind of thing. I really wish I could do non-Euclidean geometry in our mere 4 dimensions, but somehow it's easier to think about than to do. So that kind of gives this insight that he's really interested in pushing beyond the dimensions in which we can see, these 4 dimensions, and really thinking about these sort of other dimensionalities. And the accident had a huge impact on his work, actually, and I didn't know about the accident until after, but then seeing a lot of the, really researching his body of work, and then seeing this piece and the sort of break that happens in the steel here really makes me think that somehow has to do, like really cutting out these shapes out of this piece of steel, probably heating it and then bending it, and just like, it seems to me it's just been scored and then he just let it break. Maybe like he felt his spine break.
What's the 4th dimension, Ryan?
The 4 dimensions, yes. In that quote, he mentions this Park Place gallery, the Park Place artists. The Park Place group was formed in 1963 with other artists such as Anthony Megger, Frosty Myers, also known as Forrest Myers, Tamara Melcher, Leo Veldor, Dan Fleming, Peter Focus, and Edwin Ruda. And it was this sort of wild co-op space where people would just make work. It was sort of studio and gallery space in Soho. It was one of the first sort of gallery spaces to open up in the Soho district. And there was sort of no rules. People would just make things and bring it downstairs. And it was pretty dysfunctional, I think, in many ways for that first year. And actually, when the lease expired in 1964, Dean Fleming and Suvero kind of hatched this new strategy for the space. They found 5 collectors, including Vera and Albert List, Allison Gerbson, Virginia Dawn, and others, to pay a sum each year for the new Park Place Gallery in exchange for one work by each of the artists each year. They made this a 2-year agreement, and works were chosen through mutual agreement between the collectors and the artists. Because sculptural materials and fabrication are so expensive, the collectors were also asked to pay these costs. So it's a pretty interesting, radical version of how like a co-op gallery would function. And the new gallery was 542 West Broadway and was renamed the Gallery of Art and Research. And that kind of name really tries to exemplify the kind of experimental things that were happening there. Suvero said in 2008, before Park Place, it was all subjective. all about how a single artist feels. When we worked at Park Place, it was so different. We played music. Whoever sold anything, we shared all the money. Totally radical. We were crazy. The other sort of interesting thing that actually comes out of the Park Place gallery is that they had a kind of formal structure. They had a director, John Gibson, and then they also had a president who was Paula Cooper. If you're not familiar with Paula Cooper, she still has a gallery today in Chelsea. And she ended up becoming the second director and serving as director until it closed in 1967 when she opened up her own gallery in the Soho district. And her first exhibition was an exhibition to benefit the Student Mobilization Committee to end the war in Vietnam. And Paula Cooper was still today one of the most sort of out there gallerists who is really showing work that is critical of not only the government but even market systems. She also hosted, there's an artist named Steve Kurtz from the Critical Art Ensemble who got into some trouble after his wife passed away in their home, just in her sleep. The police came in and sort of found all of this material that he was working on. He's a bio artist, this group Critical Art Ensemble, and they were working on this bio arts. And this was in 2002, shortly after the 9/11 attacks. And the police saw these sort of medical gear. They saw that he had tinfoil on his windows because he's an insomniac and so he sleeps a lot during the day. And they also discovered a postcard for an exhibition that he was invited to, which had Arabic writing on it. And they called in Homeland Security, who arrested Steve Kurtz and put him in jail and had this huge legal struggle for years. And so Paula Cooper was one of the first galleries really to step up and say how wrong this was and held this huge benefit to raise money for his defense fund. It was really pretty amazing. And he ended up, did get cleared in 2011, I believe, finally. It's a pretty amazing story if you want to know more about that. So this sort of Park Place, this like wild experience that they were having, really shaped how he would sort of his politics, and his sense of what is sort of morally just that would stick with him over the years. 63 was also sort of a hallmark year for de Suvero because it was the first year he created these sort of miniature carousel sculpture that you could ride. And it was the first time he had really made an interactive sculpture. And that sort of discovery in him was something extremely new, and he just kept going with that work after that. He talks about making toys for the kids in the neighborhood that would like have these simple motions and how that also kind of bled into some of his thinking. And it's sort of this interactive quality, his sort of finding and doing attitude as an artist, like working in the studio, not sort of just phoning it in or working with fabricators, but really very hands-on. He's actually still a union card-carrying crane operator to this day. He still calls himself a communist. And it really, these sort of attitudes, this very playfulness, he refers to the work as a game, as toys at times, I think really takes him out of the sort of abstract expressionist, out of the minimalist realm, of course, but really into this sort of fluxus movement that's happening at that time, like this group of artists who are really craving a new kind of art and are creating games as art forms and really just interacting in the whole world of art in a totally new way. And de Suvero does that in his very own sense. I mean, creating these objects to be touched, to ride. Most of his public outdoor works are for kids to play on, and they operate as swings. So there's these amazing images or videos of like kids swinging on these I-beams. Just amazing, beautiful things. And so I think that sort of misplacing him, or he's operated always sort of between the cracks and we don't know where to put him, but sort of makes him in this hidden spot where people like me who would be very interested in this work don't get to know about it or don't get to find it easily because he's not included in Fluxus history either. He's not included in interactive art histories. So it's pretty wild. De Suvero himself, though, called himself a constructivist. Still today, actually in 2014, he said, "I'm a constructivist." The symbolic constructs like language, like mathematics, like art are the things that change people's minds. They are where we grow, and that is how I work. So he still to this day really believes he is in that kind of lineage of constructivism, this sort of bringing things together, not as much of a reduction process, but really a very generative process. This sort of anti-war stance really came to fruition in 1966. After the Park Place Gallery closed, he started spending a lot more time in California. He pretty much lived there after the Park Place Gallery closed. And he was there in '66 for a show at the Dwan Gallery, which is where Robert Smithson showed, a lot of earthworks artists were showing there, and some of the early minimalists. And it was then that the committee, the Artist Protest Committee in Los Angeles, asked him to design the Peace Towers, which they erected in 1960 as a protest to the Vietnam War. And the Peace Towers was this 60-foot tall construction that was collaboratively built by people of the group, including Lloyd Harold, Mel Edwards, Judy Chicago, and including Ken Kesey and the Merry Pranksters. They built the tower just over the course of a few days, and then the tower was then surrounded by a sort of tall fence around it, where these 2-foot square panels by artists were hung. And there were hundreds and hundreds of these panels by sort of all the big named artists of the time. And those panels were then later auctioned off to raise money to help fund protests. During the opening ceremony of the tower, February 26, 1966, included speeches by Susan Sontag, Irving Pelton, a former Green Beret, Donald Duncan, and there were children releasing doves. So it was very much this sort of happening experience, actually. It's relating it back to the Fluxus movement. Public opinion was very heavily divided on the war at the time, and the tower and the artists were attacked by the Marines, by the police, by the community, physically attacked. And they had to stand there during the whole time that the fence was up and the paintings were hung. It was supposed to be there for 3 days. They had to vigilantly stand there and guard them. Irving Pelton tells this story of having to defend a Frank Stella painting from a rabid police officer with a broken light bulb. When Stella heard about this, he sent Pelton a check for $1,000 writing, quote, "Anybody who puts their life on the line defending my work of art, I'm gonna send $1,000 to," end quote. I love that story. But after 3 months, they were forced to take down the Peace Towers, and they are no longer there. In 2005, DeServo said, "I don't think there are any politics in my work, maybe sexual politics. No, I felt so strongly about the colonial Vietnam Wars because I had seen the kind of poverty and misery in which Asians had to live in comparison to the wealth and ease in which Americans live. There's a question of what used to be called social consciousness, which is the kind of responsibility you feel towards another human being. I think there's a huge amount of current art that deals with the art market and that has absolutely no relation to social consciousness," end quote. During DeServo's time living in France in that abandoned oil tanker, he became the first living artist who was invited to show work at the Tuileries Gardens in 1975. And so he installed 5 enormous of his I-beam sculptures in the gardens, all of which had motion included in them. Just pretty amazing feat. And then shortly after that, on November 13th, 1975, he had an exhibition at the Whitney Museum of American Art called Citywide, in which they installed a lot of his work within the museum, but then also outdoor sculptures in all the 5 boroughs. It was the first kind of exhibition of its kind. And it also, 1975, signaled the end of the Vietnam War, and DeServo actually moved back to the United States at that time. After the 75, he really focused all of his time on public art. As I said before, he has works currently in 27 states, France, Germany, Sweden, the Netherlands, and Australia. The closest one we can see is in the Seattle, what is that called? The Olympic, there it is. The other sort of amazing thing that Suvero did, as if he hadn't already done plenty in some ways, in 1986, though, he started the Socrates Sculpture Park in an abandoned riverside landfill and illegal dump site in New York. The Socrates Sculpture Park is still under the leadership of Suvero and is dedicated to providing artists with opportunities to create and exhibit large-scale sculptures and multimedia investigations in a unique outdoor environment that encourages strong interaction between artists, artwork, and the public. It's still going very strong today. It's this amazing space for young and even established artists to try something very new with their practice. Another sort of milestone maybe, or something that's like interesting to think about with his work and his career, is his 70-foot tall, I'm going to butcher this title, Joey D. Virvi from 1977, that actually was in the Storm King exhibition, but then left to its permanent home in Lower Manhattan at Liberty Plaza next to Ground Zero at Zuccotti Park, which became home to Occupy Wall Street, of course, and became known as the Big Red Thing by the occupiers, who used it really as a base and as a site to gather and meet, and also as a protection area against the police during different raids into Occupy. Suvero has received the Lifetime Achievement in Contemporary Sculpture Award from the International Sculpture Center in 2005, and the 11th Annual Heinz Arts and Humanities Awards for commitment to aspiring artists. He also, in 2010, Suvero was the recipient of the Smithsonian Achievement of American Art Medals, as well as the National Medal of Arts. In 2013, he received the Academy of Arts and Letter Gold Medal for Sculpture. And he is currently showing work at Paula Cooper Gallery through October 25th, work that he just made last year. So that's what I have for you about Night Truck and Mark Suvero, and I would totally take any questions.
Obviously, the context of the work means a lot to how you understand it, and I'm curious about, especially having spent so much time with it and seeing him as like not part of expressionists and not quite part of Fluxus and all this. I guess, what do you think about its position here in this particular room? And if you, I know this is a hard question, but how do you think it could ideally be displayed?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. In terms of the display, the curator who purchased the work said that this work would actually function quite well outdoor, and I think that that's probably very true. Though I think that I'm really interested to see what happened if one would stand on this thing, like if it would actually tip over. Right, exactly. It's very tempting, but it does seem a bit precarious in that way.
And there's something magic about it being inside the museum and being touchable. It would be less magic if it was outside.
Right, yeah, definitely.
Especially being surrounded by these really large chimneys.
Right, exactly, yeah.
Like very static and the opposite.
Exactly, yeah. And it really, I mean, because of the Caro next door, it really does like put it right into that conversation. But it is pretty amazing, and it's right up here by another moving piece, the Alexander Calder, right above all your all's heads. So like that kind of relationship I'm pretty into, considering Calder's sort of wacky history, thinking about the circus and some other projects. So I, as a person who puts objects and pieces next to each other for a living, I think that this work could live very fine in this room, but it could also be next to the Fluxus box. And that might be an interesting relationship to have. Or maybe even next to a Tino Segal piece. Could be also pretty amazing.
I don't know what the Fluxus box
Yeah, so I didn't explain much about Fluxus. I was trying to make sure I was staying on time. Do you know about the Fluxus group? I just give a brief overview. So Fluxus was a group of artists who kind of came together in the mid-'60s, initially around the term Neo-Dada, sort of calling back to the 1916 art group started in Zurich called Dada by a series of mostly German artists who were fed up with the First World War. Most of them actually had gone to the front line and experienced the war and then was like, this is crazy, and went to Switzerland to sort of sit out the war and develop this whole new kind of art style, which they termed Dada, this sort of nonsensical word that they would repeat often in their poems. So now we flash forward a couple of wars later, and George Manciunas, a Lithuanian by birth, living an American artist, mostly a poet, but also a bit of a collagist, started really pushing some of these different types of art forms, including sound poetry, collage, and more conceptual instructional artworks. And they sort of formed this whole group, which they then termed Fluxus, actually under the guidance of one of the original Zurich Dadaists, I think it was Raoul Hausmann, or no, Hunzelbeck, Richard Hunzelbeck, encouraged him to drop the term Neo-Dada because it reflected back to the past, and Fluxus was this new thing. It seemed much more exciting. And the works, have a different form, much like maybe Alan Capro's Happenings, which are these events where the audience is totally implicated within the performance piece and become performers themselves. It can also be, though, these things that George Brecht developed, who was a Fluxus artist, called event scores, which are just simple cards with texts, much like a musical score, that the performer is then allowed to operate in how he or she seems fit. And the Fluxus boxes were these containers where they would pull in all of these things. So event scores, other instructional poems from Yoko Ono, who was a Fluxus artist, sort of games that they had developed into these boxes, not actually so different than the box of Duchamp's over there, of his own collection. So that's a sort of brief and wild ride history of Fluxus.
I think of the core of Fluxus, and this is reductive, but as being wanting to take art ideas and expand them outside of art forms, and then also wanting art to be something that you do, that you participate in, not just look at. Those are the things that I think is being core.
Mm-hmm.
Did they know Andy Warhol at all?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, for sure. There's sort of like yes and no. I mean, yes and no. They really come out of a tradition of studying with John Cage, the composer who was teaching at the New School at the time. And really, Fluxus is really born out of those classes. As are Happenings, actually. Capra also took those classes.
You don't have any pictures of any of the other pieces?
I do not have any pictures. This is a non-AV event.
But there isn't a Fluxus box here in the museum somewhere?
No.
No, there isn't. Okay. We wish there was. I wish there was. I wish there was.
The work is definitely like very online. There's a really amazing, the website's pretty fantastic and has a great map actually that's not quite interactive, but does have pictures of all the other pieces.
A Fluxus site online?
I was actually talking about the Suvero. There's not much of a Fluxus site online, but mostly for that you want to look up the group and then look at the individual artists. So there are also some great books. The Crumpacker Library probably has them, if Multnomah doesn't, and of course PNCA's library, which is open to the public, though you can't check out work.
It looks like a ship. If I had to name it, I wouldn't think night truck. I would think a ship, and it looks as though it's
Listing,
bounding
yeah,
along the
yeah.
waves, a steel hull. that could be either being made under construction or a decommissioned ship rotting. It could be either rotting or being made.
Mm-hmm. There's a piece from 1968 called The Snowplow, which has a sort of similar front, though it's much more snowplow-like, actually. Painted bright yellow with a big used tire on the back of it that's still installed outdoors in Indianapolis. I think some of the rocking, too, I wonder about his own sense of his own sureness on his legs, and if that has any kind of relation.
It's been a really weird experience sitting here and watching it rock for so long because it was really anxiety-inducing at first. It was definitely going to fall right on his feet. And then now it's become it's very much like a lullaby. And so it's kind of interesting to think about it as kind of steadiness that you gain.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, actually, do you know if he worked with any engineers or studied engineering outside of his contracting work?
He didn't, no. No, I mean, I'm sure he did study engineering, and he talks a lot about, I mean, a lot of his sculptures have this sort of wild geometry to them, where nothing's ever really perpendicular, or straight even. Everything's at an angle in some ways. This one, not as much, but there's a way in which he uses cables to really relieve that pressure, and also to make things undulate.
Well, it looks like an animal.
Mm-hmm.
It looks like an animal with something in the process on the animal.
Mm-hmm. I know, I wonder about the base. Like, it almost seems like the base is just a means to an end in some ways, too. Like this component at the top, the square, certainly makes me think of what you might see in a semi-truck, like the
cab.
exactly, where it would like connect up.
This has been an interesting problem for her, how to distribute the weight so it would rock.
Right.
So, I mean, that's the thing that amazes me, is that it takes very little effort to move the thing, and it keeps rocking for a long time.
Yeah, definitely.
I mean, that's a sophisticated engineering feat in itself.
But the seat is empty where the driver would be.
Mm-hmm.
This driverless vehicle.
I love that I can't think of any untitled Marc de Suveros that I came across, and I really appreciate that it has this title to like push you into a direction. With this kind of work, it seems so important. And I think Anthony Caro is actually also in that kind of camp where it's very, like, there are some untitled pieces, but often there's like some sort of hint of how you should think about the work, which is so lovely, I think, and generous as an artist, I think. And to me, I think maybe that's what the takeaway from doing all my research into his work is his generosity, I think. And some of the other pieces, I just accidentally hit this one, but had a real, like, they were made to be hammered. Like, he made these sculptures and then had these hammers that you would be able to whack on them to create these different sounds.
It'd be perfect for that.
Then we could have noise in the art museum as well, and then we wouldn't be wishing that all the paintings would move, but that they would make noise as well.
Well, that does make me think of Ariana Jacobs' project where she asked musicians to create serenades for specific artworks here in the museum.
That was a one-time deal, though.
Well, if there aren't any other questions, I think it's time to go have a glass of wine, right?